Aloha, Ronnie Landis here. Welcome to another edition of the official Ronnie Landis podcast show. I am also the founder of the Holistic Health Mastery certification course. You can find more information about that at holistichealthmastery.com. And you can find more information about me at my personal website, www.ronnie, And wow, oh wow, do we have a conversation for you today. I have to say that this is a type of conversation I've been looking forward to for a long time. And not to say that we haven't been able to really dial in a lot of this subject matter with other people. It's always a difference of perspectives, not necessarily a difference of opinions, but a distinction of perspective. Everyone's coming from a different angle, a different vantage point to weave together all the nuances that are encapsulated in a conversation like this. But wow, I'm so happy we brought Dr. Tim Jackson on the show because this man is an unbelievable wealth of knowledge. He's like literally a locked treasure chest, and I was so happy to be able to put the key in the lock a number of times and just turn that thing and open up Pandora's box of unbelievable distinct information that he was just able to like really weave together. What was really interesting for me in this conversation is we really dove into the analytical, scientific understanding of methylation, of detoxification, a different angle on detoxification, on hormones, on black mold, which was the first that we got to go into of any interview. I've been wanting to talk about mold infestation in the house and how that applies to corrupting or compromising the human immune system over time. Like there's so much that we really compacted in this interview. And what I loved about it, and I think what Dr. Jackson really loved about our dynamic, is that we essentially have the same body of knowledge, but we completely come at it from two different languages. He is a very scientific, grounding in all this information, where I come at it from, obviously, I have a scientific grounding as well, but I come at it from the philosophical angle. I come at it from the metaphysical angle, the psycho-emotional, spiritual angle. I come at it from a lot of the raw food and more the naturalistic nutrition perspective, where Dr. Tim Jackson, he didn't get his original education in nutrition specifically or food nutrition specifically, but he has a grounding in biochemistry and the education that your advanced physician might get, like a holistic integrative physician, to be specific. And man, it was just so great for us, a meeting of the minds to come together and really evolve the conversation and simplify it in a way that I think, even though the information is so advanced, we were able to really streamline it in a way that I think everybody listening to is going to completely understand. It's not convoluted, it's not complicated. It's sophisticated, it's simplified, and it's turned into practical strategies that everybody can act on immediately. So, without further ado, I'm excited to introduce all of you to Dr. Tim Jackson. Enjoy. Dr. Tim Jackson received his undergraduate degree in health science and chemistry from Wake Forest University in 2003. He completed his doctorate in physical therapy from the Medical University of South Carolina in 2009. Realizing that manual therapy and orthopedic care helped only some of his patients, he began studying functional and environmental medicine as well as digestive health in an effort to help others achieve wellness. Dr. Tim is educated in nutritional biochemistry, digestive health, and its systemic effects, as well as functional endocrinology. he recently completed the spine portion of the active release technique methodology, a system that addresses musculoskeletal trigger points and helps to expedite the healing process. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ronnie. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're having me on. I look forward to it, and I think we'll have a lot of good stuff to talk about.
Oh, it's unavoidable.
That's right.
It's unavoidable. We've talked back and forth the last couple of weeks through a mutual friend that put us into connection, and since then, a few little light bulbs have turned on inside of me when I started researching your work, different interviews you've been on, and it really the feeling that I get listening to your explanation of a lot of the topics that I've steeped myself into, but just from more of the natural food and naturally derived supplement and overall lifestyle perspectives, it's really cool, as we were kind of talking about before we got onto this, the bridging of two worlds, two languages, that you come from an angle where I wasn't personally, my foundation wasn't built from the really strong science and medical perspective, and I'm kind of bridging into that world. So I'm really excited to kind of bridge those two things together here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, a disconnect between those two worlds a lot of times, and the more we can connect them, the better off people will be.
Absolutely. So, the best place to start any of these conversations is just a synopsis on how you got started in your field. I really like to understand what was the impetus behind somebody's, or what was the catalyst behind somebody actually getting into this field, because as I'm sure you're aware, what I've learned is that people on a healing path or become professionals in the healing field rarely do it because they're totally healthy, right? We
Right.
tend to take that for granted and we overlook that, but usually when we have some kind of disorder, so to speak, that's usually like the catalyst for us to become more interested in. So I'm curious, what's a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah, so I went to undergrad at Wake Forest University in North Carolina, and my intention was to, after graduation, get my medical doctorate. And I did well academically and grade-wise, but I was kind of type A, burning the candles at both ends.
Uh-huh.
And I had a surgery during the winter break of my senior year at undergrad, and that kind of sent me on a downward spiral in terms of my health. And I'd also done plenty of internships at the medical school there, and the doctor said, we think that, the information you're looking for, you're not really going to get in a traditional medical school. So after I graduated, I kind of, wandered here and there doing different jobs, but I still was sick, and I finally found a doctor who addressed candida and metal toxicity and a few other things in me, and got me to the point where I could, go to a doctorate program. And I was really into exercise and nutrition, so I chose physical therapy, and I started rehabbing athletes and at your everyday average Joe after graduation. And I realized I could help people a lot more by balancing their biochemistry, their hormones, their GI health, than by just manipulating their spine or mobilizing their elbow, or prescribing, a certain set of exercises. So I kind of, studied functional medicine on my own and through, different continuing education courses, but most of it's been learning from other doctors and just learning on my own, really.
Yeah, and what comes up for me immediately, how I kind of want to direct this is, when I got started in all this, it was interesting because I didn't actually, I didn't know that I was being led into this field, but when I was pursuing my professional athletic career in basketball at the time, I was about 23-ish, and I was in a transition in my life, so I took a job at the emergency room in a hospital in Oakland as an HIV tester. And I didn't think much of it other than it was a job. But then over 3 years, I became intimately aware of the obviousness of what actually goes on. And I call it the dungeon of the emergency room.
Right.
And over the years, that's when I got into raw food, and I started really waking up in an accelerated pace. and it was kind of like the veil got pulled down from me, and I actually saw the reality of what goes on behind the scenes. And I think that kind of laid the foundation for my perspective and to lead me into this. So anyways, I bring that up because I wanted to get your perspective, and also for the benefit of all the listeners, let's discuss just very quickly some of the challenges that people face with the mainstream medical model and also its connection to the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, I mean, the traditional medical model is very linear in thinking. In other words, they believe that A causes B, and then you take remedy C, and that gets rid of it. And if you contrast that with the functional medicine model, it's more like, 12 different circles and lines interacting, connecting all the different systems of the body. The traditional allopathic model is that, you get sick, you either take a medicine or you cut it out through surgery, and the doctor does the healing. Whereas in functional medicine, it's, we kind of remove the barriers to healing and the toxicity and correct the homeostasis or the balance in the body, and then try to return the body, excuse me, to a state of, internal balance, and it helps so that it can regulate itself. And, for example, with different infections and pathogens, if the terrain in the body is correct, meaning that, you don't have a lot of toxins, environmental pollutants, heavy metals, etc., and your immune system is being supported through good nutrition, and you have a good circadian biology, good sleep cycle, your nutrition is really, on par, you're not eating GMOs, that sort of thing, then you should be able to really heal yourself.
So essentially what I'm actually hearing from you is that we tend to compartmentalize and fragment different conditions, like, say, for example, you have an issue with your liver, you have an adrenal exhaustion, you have a thyroid issue. Those are fragmented parts of the body that we localize our attention to, and are like, okay, well then this person needs a thyroid medication, or this person needs a blood thinner or whatever. And we're not really looking integratively and holistically at the whole vehicle being out of balance with one another. It's a lifestyle issue, essentially, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And people tend to forget their environment, and I was guilty of that early on. I focused on, nutrition and supplementation and going to bed on time, but I didn't really, it wasn't until 2009 I really began studying mold and VOCs and different environmental pollutants, and looking at studies. For example, I don't remember what year the study was done, but they looked at people who did aerobic exercise in a rural area versus polluted inner city area, and they found that the people who exercised in the inner city area really had a lot of more cardiovascular negative events than people who exercised in a rural area and weren't exposed to pollution. So, people today say, traditional medical model, if you ask a traditional allopath, they'll say, we have built-in detoxification mechanisms, there's no need for detox. But those mechanisms only can tolerate so much. And the average baby born today has between 200 and 250 known carcinogens. And that's just carcinogens, that's not other toxins. So you're coming into the world toxic, and then you're exposed through air, food, water, you name it. And so, you can easily see how you start off, behind the eight ball in terms of your health and wellness, and you have to really fight to kind of get it back.
That's such a brilliant point. What that brings up for me, I've done a lot of research and work into prenatal care, pre-conception detoxification, and I've been educated by a lot of colleagues on the reality that a lot of these toxins, these pesticides, or even parasite infections or lead, heavy metals, they get transferred through the umbilical cord. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. And then another important point, along with the toxins, is you've probably heard me mention the term stealth pathogens. And a lot of us are walking around with pathogens, and most people, when they think of pathogens, they think of an acute infection, like you have a cold or the flu. But viruses and other pathogens exist on a more dubious level as well
Yes.
by just creating constant inflammation in the body. They can get into the brain and activate a type of cell that's called the microglia. It's a white blood cell. And that long term creates brain fog and eventually neurodegeneration. And a lot of those pathogens get passed on in utero from mother to baby. And, if you catch those pathogens as an adult, it's a lot different than catching it as a newborn whose gut, is not probably healthy yet, and they already have all these toxins. So it's very common for mothers to pass on, a load of pathogens to their children.
I love that term, stealth pathogens. That totally lines up with when I start studying like Lyme disease or calcification conditions. And when you study calcification, you come to realize like it's not just about the calcium phosphate crystals or whatever calcium material. It's actually behind the scenes. There's nanobacteria that essentially have infested themselves into certain regions of the body and have built up hard layers to protect themselves from the immune system. That's kind of what in like cancer cells with the protein encasement in biofilms, like that's what I'm getting from that, is that they're stealth. I never actually heard that term. That's really interesting. They're hiding behind a layer of positively charged toxins that they create kind of like a fortress around.
Exactly. Yeah, they do that. They're very intelligent, and really the reason we call them stealth is because a lot of people think, oh, we get the pathogen, we take an antiviral, an antibiotic, but these pathogens have the ability to modulate the immune system. So, for example, the very first thing the Lyme spirochete bacteria does is it turns off the plasma cells that produce the humoral immunoglobulins. And so the test that we use, the Western blot, is wrong 46% of the time because it's testing a system that's been turned off. And so, and another thing that really gets the immunologists, the traditional ones, is that they don't understand, if we have 200 people and we all get the same pathogen, they think we should all have the exact same symptoms. And that's just not true. Some of us won't get sick at all. Others may be bedridden for 2 weeks, It's just a very, very different way of looking at things. And the pathogens, especially viruses, they're essentially parasites because they incorporate their DNA into our DNA, so they require our cells to replicate for their DNA to be passed on. And so when we address viruses, we technically don't kill them. What we do is we silence their expression.
So in other words, that's kind of like the concept of terrain modification opposed to antibioticizing something to death, and then it turns into MRSA, antibiotic-resistant strain of bacteria, which we see in the hospital setting as an epidemic. When we're trying to kill something, it's kind of like a philosophical quandary because we're trying to kill things without modifying the actual inner ecosystem.
Right. Not only are we not trying to modify the inner ecosystem, we're not modulating the immune response.
Right.
So, a lot of people have these toxins, lipophilic, fat-soluble toxins stored in their body.
Right.
And if we don't get rid of those, the mitochondria, which your listeners have probably heard of, are, the batteries of your cells, they won't work correctly. And when the mitochondria don't work correctly, essentially all the systems in your body start to decrease in their functionality. And so, we really have to modify the inner ecosystem. We have to modulate and support the immune system. And, we have to change our environment and our lifestyle. You can't go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and wake up at 6 and expect to get over an infection.
Yeah, absolutely. This is so great. I already have like I'm looking at the constellation of data points and topics to dive into on this. And so I feel like the best place to go, we're kind of giving people like we're laying out the blueprint here, but one of the things that I became aware of from studying some of your interviews is that you actually had I call it like an invasive surgical procedure in the dental field. Let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, so the winter break of my senior year as an undergrad student, I had braces, and I got talked into by the oral surgeon. He said, with your jaw alignment, you probably won't have any of your normal teeth by the age of 30. And of course, that's just a scare tactic. None of it was true in hindsight, but they broke my bottom jaw and took bone from it and added it to my upper jaw, my maxilla. And I was under anesthesia for between 8 and 8.5 hours. And technically, the surgery supposedly only should last 3 to 3.5 hours. So, I don't know whether the surgeon went on vacation during the surgery or what, but, it was a very barbaric surgery. They put in 20-something titanium screws, 6 titanium plates, and, I just never really recovered from that. And, each tooth is connected to a circuit in the body through the acupuncture meridians. And so the other thing is they didn't do what's called a ELISA test, which tests how well your immune system can tolerate certain metals. So my immune system was probably reacting to the titanium.
Right.
And then finally, in 2014, I was able to find a surgeon in Philadelphia who went in and took out all the screws that he could get to and the plates that he could get to. There's still a few in there, but some of them so much bone growth had occurred around them that he said it would cause me too much pain to remove them. Interestingly enough, in Germany, when they do this surgery, they actually bring you back in 3 months later and remove the metal. But in the U.S., they just keep it in because they think it's safe, and it's totally not safe.
Is that because of liabilities?
Probably that, and they're just lazy, and they don't. The insurance companies really won't, as far as I know, pay for the revisions. They basically just assume that, okay, you get this metal in, it's fixed, why take it out? It's not hurting anything, because they don't see or understand the pathological consequences of affecting the jaw and the jawbone, and how cavitations or infections in the jaw can spread bacteria throughout the body.
Yeah, this reminds me of root canals and the whole thing with the dental tubules and the periodontal ligament, and where when someone does a root canal procedure, they essentially just carve out the inner pulp and that inner material, and then place the cement material, if you will, in there, and then cap it. But what is not acknowledged by the AMA or the ADA for sure is that bacteria in there ferments, and those tubules root into the cardiovascular system and the lymph system. And what they found out was, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's something ridiculous, like 97% of people with cancer, just a general cancer, also had root canal procedures.
Correct, absolutely. So yeah, there's a definite, connection between the dental health and root canals, jaw surgery, that sort of thing. Infectious bacteria, and that's why some people will say that oil pulling really helps, because it's really kind of pulling out some of the pathogenic bacteria that don't get into your bloodstream then. And that's why certain people with heart conditions, they'll take prophylactic antibiotics before they have a dental cleaning, because they don't want those bacteria and those pathogens to infect the heart valves.
Oh, interesting. So through what's coming to me is through these dental procedures, whether it's an extraction or just any kind of procedure, it's an invasive surgery. It's really deep, but essentially there's the probability that even when you go in there, certain infections like streptococci mutans, bacterial infections that are in the mouth, maybe they're dormant or just incubating, they can be released upon surgery. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely they can. And, for whatever reason, whether it's, through the acupuncture meridians, but, if you look at the teeth charts and how each tooth is connected to different organs and different circuits in the body, you can usually correspond symptoms to certain teeth or certain issues with teeth. And that's why, for example, the trigeminal nerve that innervates the face, if it gets stuck or impinged upon at the TMJ, the temporomandibular joint, it locks you into a fight or flight mode.
Right.
So it's very hard to heal. And so that's another connection between, the oral cavity and the systemic body.
You hear about this TMJ, and people have these like really like you see people on the street and they have these like really contractive issues, and it's like it's easy to be like, oh, that person's upset, that person's like agitated, but then you look at like the physiological components, like wow, they're actually locked in place in their vagus nerve, which mediates the parasympathetic and sympathetic homeostasis, is totally like the image I have is just like really tight, like really it's not able to relax.
Right, exactly. And when you're locked in that, fight or flight mode, obviously, you're getting blood flow directed away from the digestive tract.
Right.
Your immune function's not going to be optimal. It's going to alter your hormonal status. You're going to get pregnenolone steal, elevated cortisol levels, decreased DHEA levels. So it's basically putting you in what we call a catabolic state, which is a wear and tear or breakdown state. And, obviously in order to heal, we need to be in an anabolic state where we're building and repairing and healing.
Okay, this is great. So when I hear that, I think of from my perspective, I think of the catabolism and anabolism balance as when you wake up in the morning, your body is in a catabolic state, aka a detoxification mode. So it's purging, it's releasing, it's flushing out, and then my basic assumption is that the basic metabolic process, while we're waking up, we're moving around, we're creating little wear and tear. So essentially, we're in a catabolic state by definition, I guess. But then the only time we're truly in a full anabolic, rejuvenating, repairing state is when we're in a deep sleep. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah, essentially that's correct. During the day as well, if you look at someone's like 24-hour hormone panel, you want to look at the balance of the anabolic hormones being testosterone,
Right.
HGH, DHEA, etc., compared to the catabolic hormones like cortisol. And, you obviously want to have more of the anabolic hormones and less of the catabolic hormones. The media has kind of gotten people thinking that anabolic means anabolic steroids, but anabolic just means, healing and repairing. And so, in the gym, a lot of people think that they're getting stronger while they're working out, but they're actually in a catabolic state while they're working out. And your post-workout nutrition and rest and recovery is what puts you in an anabolic state.
That was I really appreciate that explanation. Also what comes up for me too is all my fascination into the hormonal symphony of the body. And you mentioned these, what I would call androgenic, maybe not colloquially, because androgenic is often termed as male sex hormones, but like progesterone would fit into that in terms of being the counterbalance to either cortisol or estradiol inflation, estrogen dominance. And I know that cortisol is directly related to estrogen dominance because I came to find that if someone has elevated cortisol, they share a similar pathway, and cortisol can create estrogen dominance.
Yeah, exactly. So in men, when you get elevated cortisol or elevated inflammation from anything, it puts you in a more estrogen dominant state. So you're more likely to aromatize your testosterone into estrogen. In women, it's the opposite. So women with PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, with high blood sugar, etc., and high cortisol, they actually create extra testosterone, and that's why they develop things like facial hair and acne, etc. So you're exactly right. When inflammation and cortisol are out of balance, that creates pregnenolone steal, where your precursor molecules or precursor hormone molecules are getting shunted to the production of cortisol. And it actually, in females, can happen with progesterone as well. I had a 38-year-old client who was taking 200 milligrams a day of progesterone, but her levels were still really low because she had all these external and internal stressors that was causing her progesterone to become diverted into cortisol.
Yeah, all right. I have to push this button since we're on the topic. And interestingly enough, for me, this has never really come up in any of the previous interviews up to this point. So, in the bridging of our two worlds, when I think of aromatization, that conversion of AKA good hormones into catabolic hormones and essentially just estrogen inflation. I think of different herbal components like estrogen or aromatase inhibitors, right? And so
Right.
this is a very interesting perspective. Years ago when I got into this, I started to piece this thing that I was seeing, when people take pine pollen, or they take tonkat ali, or certain very powerful androgenic herbs. With herbs, they're more like they have more of an intelligence opposed to a pharmaceutical or a synthesized nutrient that doesn't have a wide spectrum of cofactors to actually teach the body kind of what to do. So
Right.
I would see people. I used to work at a tonic bar, a herbal tonic bar in LA, and so I would see people that were clearly overstimulated. They were clearly just on that kind of rage, that
Right.
anabolic rage. And I don't know if you're familiar with kind of some of the herbal components, but like things like deer antler, which is very
Yeah.
androgenic. And so I remember this one time, this is when it started to come through to me. This one guy would always come in every day and he's like, I need 10 shots of deer antler. And I kind of looked at him one day and I was like, I was their kind of their like go-to nutritionist or whatever. And I kind of told him, I was like, I think you need some passion flower. I think you need some like yin herbs. I think you need something that's going to help you hold that testosterone that you clearly have in place. Because my thing is that if you keep doing the deer antler the way you're doing, it might actually be aromatizing or converting in a direction you don't want it to go. So that's an interesting thing, is like using some of these anabolic or androgenic hormone precursors and also putting in the estrogen blockers in place.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so you can take all the aromatase inhibitors you want, but if your blood sugar is out of balance, that negatively affects things. Like you mentioned before, if your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis is out of balance, because your body is going to prioritize cortisol before it prioritizes your sex hormones, because without cortisol, you can die within a few
Right.
hours. Without your sex hormones, you won't feel very good, but you can still survive.
So it's like a
So,
hierarchy of priorities your body's working with.
exactly. Very much so.
What are some of the things in your world that you've been availed to on this subject?
In terms of how to modulate the response,
Like how to modulate the hormone response, maybe even like on the aromatization subject.
yeah, with the aromatization subject, you definitely want to look at blood sugar imbalances and blood sugar swings. That's a huge one. Toxicity, endocrine disrupting chemicals, that's another one. Things like zinc deficiency, you need zinc
Yeah.
to help convert testosterone into its metabolites instead of estrogen. But first of all, you want to really look at the adrenal glands and what they're doing, and find this, not just support the adrenal glands because they don't just turn on by themselves, but find the stressors, both internal and external, that are activating the adrenals and work on those. You can support the adrenal and adrenal axis in the short term, but the long-term goal should be to eradicate these stressors so that the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis isn't constantly turned on. What I tell people, I have kind of a silly saying, is that you can't have an erection when you're running from a tiger.
Totally.
And what I mean by that is that if you're in a sympathetic state and your HPA is constantly turned on and you're not in a parasympathetic state, then your body's not interested in reproduction.
Right. It's kind of like that analogy of, or actually the way that I was kind of educated scientifically on this concept is that when you're in that constant fight or flight state, your immune system, your immunological factors actually pretty much turn off because that's not the area of immediate priority. And so your body is getting this hypercatabolic signal perpetually, and then your blood stops pooling to the digestive system like you alluded to, and it goes to the immediate tissue functions based on like quick movement or running away from something or survival. And so like your immune system essentially collapses over time, correct?
Yeah, you get what we call immune senescence or T cell exhaustion, where
Yeah.
a lot of times what happens is people, when they do lab tests, they'll test for the number of immune cells, and the number may be correct or optimal, but the activity of the cells may not be.
Oh,
And
interesting.
And there's certain functional labs that can test the activity of the cells, because you would be better off having a moderate amount of, immunological cells that are very active than having, a large amount that are completely inactive.
This is so fun, wonderful. When I hear you say it like that, where you're testing the exterior numbers, the exterior immune cells, but you're not aware of their actual capabilities, the immune intelligence, essentially. And so I think I just have like an innate calling to focus on that naturally, as like, I look at like, okay, well, what is the intelligence of your immune system? Are they actually able to target foreign organisms or whatever the case is? And that's why I defer to things like, I don't know if you're familiar with the medicinal mushrooms.
Yeah.
Like reishi and chaga and cordyceps and all those amazing things. And one of the great things that keeps coming back to me from that perspective is that the beta-glucans and the polysaccharides, the essential long-chain bitter sugars, they actually plug into the white cells like a USB port and upload immunological information. So your immune system actually is intelligent enough to do what it's designed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. The only time I don't use those herbs is I deal with a lot of people with mold toxicity.
Okay.
And because, they're derived from fungal origins, it can irritate some people's immune systems. And the other thing that is kind of hard for some people to understand is that you can have part of your immune system that's underactive and another part that's overactive.
Okay.
And so it's not always so much about just boosting the immune system, it's more about modulating.
Right, exactly.
And, there are different tests that can get kind of expensive that you can look at and see where the balance of the immune system is. But, you always want to have a healthy balance between Th1, Th2, Th17, which they just stands for T helper cells. And, if you get stuck in one side of the immune system, that's when imbalances and autoimmune disorders occur. You should be able to switch, just like you should be able to switch from parasympathetic to sympathetic. You should be able to switch from Th1 to Th2.
Wonderful. So essentially, when we think of an autoimmune condition, the distillation of that, made simple, is essentially your immune system is quote-unquote hyperstimulated. But what I'm getting from you is that it's not a blatant statement. It's not just like a general statement to say like, oh, your entire immune system, because your immune system is an advanced and complex kind of system. It's not just one thing. So what I'm getting from this is that it could be a part of your immune system that is hyperstimulated, out of balance, but there's other factors in that immune complex to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and that's why it's good to check, different immune markers, both direct and indirect. And, there are some sort of home tests you can do where you take certain nutrients that stimulate Th1, and if they make you feel worse, that means you're Th1 dominant. And there are other nutrients you can take that stimulate Th2, and if they make you feel, say, better, then that means you're Th1 dominant, Th2 deficient. Most people with chronic issues are I don't want to generalize it, but they're generally Th2 dominant. And Th1 is the part of your immune system that kills intracellular pathogens. So if you're stuck in a Th2 dominant state, you start to collect these pathogens over time. and they create what we call, and I'm sure you know this term, but cytokine storm.
Mm-hmm.
And your listeners, they know it as well. They just may not have heard the term. So if you've experienced the flu or a cold, what the negative feelings that you're experiencing are actually from these pro-inflammatory molecules. It's not directly the pathogen itself. It's the immune system's response. And we have we have pro-inflammatory cytokines, and we have anti-inflammatory. Most people walking around today have too many pro-inflammatory cytokines, which not only damage your arterial walls, they poke holes in the blood-brain barrier and create brain fog and decreased intelligence. They create what we call cytokine-induced sickness behavior, which means decreased sex drive, you want to sleep a lot, or you have severe insomnia. So pretty much all the negative symptoms you can think of are typically due to some degree, either directly or indirectly, from these molecules.
Yeah, and what comes up for me as I hear you explain that is, again, it comes back to this whole antibioticizing paradigm where we think that it's actually the said virus, fungus, the bacteria, the parasite in of itself that's causing the problem. But what we come to find out is that it's the excrement, it's the end products that those organisms are releasing into the body that are actually causing that inflammatory response, right?
Right, exactly. So with, things like Lyme disease, well, I'll tell you, a medical doctor mentor of mine, he said, you can't kill your way to health. And, what he meant by that is that, antimicrobials are needed, but you can't just take them over and over and over and over and over and over again. You have to modulate and support the immune response, and you have to, and this gets into, it's called low-dose allergy therapy or low-dose immunotherapy, where you take certain, it's kind of like homeopathy for the immune system. And it kind of tells the immune system it's okay that these pathogens are there, because cavemen have been found to have this Lyme spirochete in them.
Oh, interesting.
So that tells us right there that it's not necessarily the bugs, it's the terrain, it's your immune system, it's your sympathetic dominance, it's your subconscious mind, and tapes that you play over and over in your head telling yourself that you can't get better, and the things that you've been programmed to believe, most of which are not true.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think about Helicobacter pylori, H. pylori, a lot of people have heard of, and when you really get down to it, essentially it appears to be the firewall in your digestive system being your gastric acids. Once that firewall is down, you're not producing the right amount or pH of gastric acid, then some of these infectious organisms bind with the mucus and kind of get rooted in. But if you have hydrochloric acid as it should be, then that's kind of like a firewall, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and again, if you read the studies on H. pylori, half of them will say, it predisposes you to gastric cancer or this sort of disorder, and the other half of the studies will say, it's completely benign. And I think the differences in those study results comes from the terrain and the other health factors involved in someone's body. Because a lot of people think that, there's good bacteria and there's bad bacteria, but we also have commensal bacteria, which they're healthy up to a certain extent, but if you have an overgrowth of those commensal bacteria, they crowd out some of your other beneficial bacteria, and they can essentially become detrimental.
Right. Wow. It's like, I think of Candida and all the stuff going on about Candida, but really what it is, it's the I guess the evolution of a yeast essentially that was designed to be there to eat up like necrotic matter and material, dead material. It's like a recycling organism, but then when the terrain gets out of balance, it like morphs into this other infection.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where some of the homeopathic remedies come in. The FDA, unfortunately, has cracked down on some of them, but they are basically immunoeducators, is what I call them. They educate the immune system to keep the pathogen or quote unquote pathogen in the harmless form versus allowing the terrain to become out of balance, and that's when it becomes, an opportunistic infection that, invades the body.
Right. So what I wanna go into with you, I know you're a huge proponent of superoxide dismutase and glutathione precursors, and those are clearly some of the most important, enzyme, antioxidant, toxin removal molecules in the body. Let's dive into that.
Yeah, so with glutathione, glutathione is the body's most powerful antioxidant, but and it's made through what we call the methylation pathway or methylation cycle. But some things that most people don't know about glutathione is that, number one, it's what controls the redox status, meaning the balance of pro-oxidants to antioxidants and the charge inside your cells. It's also a natural antiviral. It's crucial for thyroid health, and it's very crucial for the health of the gut mucosal lining. And so if you have low glutathione, not only are you not going to be able to detox, the viruses are going to go crazy and replicate more often, and your immune function is going to decrease. And from what I've read, as your levels of glutathione go down, your risk of pretty much every disorder out there increases. And so glutathione, one of its other important roles is that it sits in front of the batteries of our cells, the mitochondria, and it does that along with superoxide dismutase, another potent antioxidant, and they pretty much try and catch any free radicals that could damage the mitochondria, because the mitochondria, they're very sensitive to oxidative stress. And so when we don't have enough of these antioxidants, our mitochondria can become damaged. And, when we think about energy, we think about, like the energy to exercise or run or lift weights. But energy is required for the normal tissue functions of your body. And so if those mitochondria get hurt or damaged enough, overall tissue and ultimately organ function will begin to decrease.
So are these two enzymes, superoxide dismutase and glutathione, are they acting like gatekeepers at the gate of the mitochondria?
Yes, to some degree. They sit there in front of the mitochondria and they try to catch as many of these harmful compounds and molecules as they can. And so every time we're exposed to, a toxin, whether it's, environmental air pollution or whatever, we're using up some of our glutathione, especially, and superoxide dismutase. And so you can also have certain genetic polymorphisms where you basically have these little hiccups in your biochemistry and you may not make enough of the glutathione. And so it can be important to supplement with the cofactors or certain direct forms of these antioxidants, because what we call the redox status of the cell, again, the balance of the antioxidants and the pro-oxidants, that really controls everything inside the cell in terms of what's going on.
I got to tell you, I I had some little bit of energy issues not that long ago, and just kind of mental stuff, just little brain fog and hiccups here and there. And I've been playing with nootropics and all kinds of cognitive enhancement and neurological protective strategies, but it wasn't until I started supplementing with N-acetylcysteine, NAC for short, that I started to have almost immediate clarity in my mind. I really it to the point where emotionally and spiritually I felt way more connected. I felt way happier. My nervous system was just immediately modulated. It was profound. And so ever since then, I've gotten deeper into the subject you're talking about. But for me, I found NAC, and I know it's not the only thing, but NAC as a precursor for glutathione is really powerful.
Yeah, NAC, alpha lipoic acid, certain herbs can help as precursors. You can also do the topical form of glutathione. One of the companies I work with, they have a lotion that's a topical glutathione. And if you have a physician or a nurse practitioner that will write you for either IVs of glutathione or intranasal glutathione. Those can also be very helpful. And there's also the liposomal forms that you can take on an empty stomach that are supposed to have superior bioavailability. And balancing glutathione is very important. If someone's extremely toxic, they may have to take it easy and start at a very, very low dose. Otherwise, it's kind of like you're opening up all these pathways at once, and your body doesn't really know what to do with it. And especially if your gut health and your kidney health aren't optimal, it can make you feel sort of auto-intoxicated.
Right. Actually, it's funny you even said auto-intoxicated because I was thinking about that earlier. But anyways, yeah, I kind of want to go more into this subject because it's like it connects to all kinds of things like methylation. Actually, you know what? I would love to touch on that because that is a very popular concept right now. And when I first got into the idea of methylation, it was kind of confusing with all the different information, but it's actually a very simple process that I realized over the years of being into like raw food and cleansing. I'm like, wait a minute, this appears to be actually what's going on. The liver congestion and the residual, pharmaceutical or street drug congestion that holds up in the liver. So essentially, we're talking about a process that relieves toxicity of the liver and allows it to function better.
Yeah. I mean, with the methylation cycle as a whole, it actually encompasses over or right at 100 different biochemical reactions. And methylation simply means adding a carbon atom with 3 hydrogen atoms to different molecules. Mm-hmm. And so some of the things that methylation is responsible for is the production of glutathione, some of the production of coenzyme Q10 and carnitine, production of your neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, GABA. So those are extremely important. And overall, just keeping the mitochondria and the energy cycle going. It plays an important role in that. And also an important role in controlling inflammation and the production of myelin, which is the coating that goes around our nerves. So MTHFR, or is short for methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, and that's just the enzyme that converts folic acid, which is synthetic, to methylfolate, which is what we can use. And so for people, who have 1 or 2 copies of the MTHFR enzyme, you want to stay away from folic acid because it actually builds up in the bloodstream, and there's a test you can do for it, and it lowers your natural killer cells, so it can actually predispose you to things like cancer. Other things that can happen is pregnancy loss, miscarriages are common, and what the research is showing is that, what you and I do today can epigenetically affect up to 4 generations after us. And so it's not a true genetic hardwiring, but, if we went through, a war or a car crash or something like that, that can manifest several, generations down the line.
Wow, that's incredible. So essentially, say somebody that's been in a very traumatic situation, they went to war or whatever the case is, that epigenetic transference of just like the trauma points that build up in the physical tissue, that I see a lot of people that have, I'm in the world of I'm in all the different kind of like niches of consciousness, like past life regression, hypnotherapy, and trauma removal and all that kind of stuff, right? So what kind of comes up for me is like, wow, so it appears that somebody that's born 20 years ago can manifest certain traumas that manifest or that form in their actual body, and it might not even be essentially a trauma they had.
Right, exactly. And, you know more about these therapies than I do, but, there's family constellation work where you can work on, like whatever your ancestors experienced that was stressful or whatever your parents, grandparents, etc. experienced and, work through some of those things that, aren't at the conscious level and you may have no idea what's going on, But when you bring them up, it's sort of an awakening, and you can actually get a release of toxins at the same time.
Right. I see this happen a lot. I have a very close friend of mine on the island here in Hawaii where I live, and he is an incredible neuromuscular release therapist. The work he does is unbelievable, and basically what I always see from the work I've done with him, but seeing other people go into his office, it's like an off-gassing of emotional trauma and all this stuff, like just beyond the physical. It just like off-gasses out of people.
Uh-huh. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, doing things like inner child work or, traumas that were never resolved, definitely can affect the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system balance. And like you said, also controls the immune system. So, if you had trauma as a child, it doesn't mean you can't get well and be optimally healthy, but you might have to just do some extra things to get around that.
So again, we bring it back to the holistic and lifestyle concept opposed to this thing, that thing, this thing being the actual issue. It's how you live your life, essentially, is what I'm getting from this.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and so a lot of people think, methylation just means you have to take some methylfolate and B12, but you can have too much oxidative stress, things like heavy metals. They can also block the methylation cycle. And so you have to remove the toxins, and you also have to supply the other cofactors such as magnesium, zinc, and the other B vitamins like B1, B2, B3, etc. So it's a comprehensive program. And gut health is important too, because if gut health is not optimal, phase 3 detoxification doesn't work as well, and it sends these biotoxins, these lipopolysaccharides or endotoxins, to the liver, and that negatively affects your phase 1 and your phase 2 detox, and phase 2 is where methylation occurs. So
is that like the cytochrome P450 process?
Yeah, so phase 1 is cytochrome P450.
Okay.
And then phase 2 consists of 6 different reactions: acetylation, transsulfuration, methylation, things like that. And so, if you have too many harmful bacteria releasing endotoxins, that overworks the liver, and then that kind of shifts a lot of the stress to the kidneys. And that's why so many people will have abnormal kidney marker values on their labs, like the BUN, blood urea nitrogen, and creatinine levels.
That's fascinating. I've actually never heard of phase 3. You always hear about phase 1, phase 2 detoxification, liver detoxification. It's like, but now like phase 3, okay, that's something new to me.
Yeah, so phase 3 is, you'll see some of the molecules, they're called CMOT, things like that, and they're the transporters to get toxins out of the body, because in an optimally healthy body, what happens is metals should be excreted through the stool. But when there's gut inflammation or malabsorption or dysbiosis or whatever may be occurring, it shifts the stress to the kidneys. And that's why, we look and think of the kidneys as, being the chelating organs of the body.
Okay, got it. So phase 3 essentially is chelation, extraction.
Yeah, it's pulling things out of the body, exactly.
Okay, got it. Are you familiar with things like trimethylglycine or calcium D-glucarate and all those kind of like xenoestrogen removal products?
Yeah. So calcium D-glucarate I'll use when someone has elevated beta-glucuronidase or gut issues. But I also try to optimize gut health as well and liver health. There's certain polymorphisms, which, we won't get too much into, but one's called COMT, and that one can cause a tendency for you to collect estrogens in the body. And so if you have those polymorphisms, you have poor gut health, you have blood sugar imbalances, and you have inflammation, then you're set up to be estrogen dominant.
Fascinating. All the pieces kind of come together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's man, I feel like this just went by like in 5 minutes.
I know, I feel the same way.
I think the last thing I want to discuss for the benefit of everyone and myself is mold toxicity, because this is kind of an undercurrent, this is an under the radar epidemic that pretty much everybody is susceptible to, because everyone within a financial capacity is living in a house.
Right. Yeah, so with mold toxicity, people think that, you have to live in an old house or you have to have water damage to have mold. But, I'll give you an example of a patient I had when I was in North Carolina. She had a house that was only, 2 or 3 years old. And the way they seal houses to make them so energy efficient, it creates poor airflow, and there's only a few species of mold in the house. And when you don't have that competition from the other species, you tend to get mold overgrowth. The other thing is, depending on what part of the country you live in, I'm from South Carolina, and so there, we have to have dehumidifiers underneath our house so that the air coming in, is not moist, because you can go in and remediate the mold, but it's going to come back if you don't correct the moisture problem. And you don't have, there's about 200 different species that I know of mold. The only one that you really see and smell is the black mold, which is called Stachybotrys. And I want to make an important point here for your listeners, and that's bleach and Clorox do not kill mold. All they do is change the color. And I see this happen a lot in schools. They'll see spots and they'll, pour bleach on them, thinking that, it's killing the mold, and it's not doing anything. And that's why 25% of the population has a certain epigenetic, or I guess you could say genetic, profile where you can't detoxify mold toxins, which we call mycotoxins. And this is a separate issue from having a mold allergy. Now, you can have both. You can have a mold allergy and trouble detoxifying. But, for example, myself, I have what's called the dreaded genotype, which means that I can't detoxify mold at all. So if you don't have that, you and I are living in the same house, I'm having all these weird symptoms, and you're sitting there thinking I'm, cuckoo, because, your body's able to excrete the mycotoxins. And for people that have, the issues with the excretion, you have to be extra careful with your house, where you go, and you have to use things like binders. I use zeolite, yes, activated charcoal, Pectasol, one called Takasimi Supreme, which is derived from the bamboo tree. You can go that route, and there's also a protocol. It's called the Patricia Kane protocol, after the doctor who came up with it, and it involves taking high doses of phosphatidylcholine to flush the liver and gallbladder, because that's where these biotoxins tend to accumulate. And just to give your listeners some ideas of the far-reaching implications of mold and mycotoxins, it interferes with a hormone that most people haven't heard of. It's called alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, or alpha MSH for short. And it's responsible for pain control, sleep, downstream hormone production, and also skin pigmentation. So your sleep will become, fragmented. You may have a lot of postnasal drip. You may become really pale. You may get dark circles under your eyes. All sorts of things that can occur. And it creates what we call, the acronym is CIRS, Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome. So we can go in and remove the mold, but we also have to kind of modulate and calm down the immune system and let it know that it's okay, that the mold is now gone.
Wow. Wow. So I think of people that have personality disturbances, agitation, and also behavioral issues, like children that are sitting in school and they're sitting at a desk and they're listening to a monotone teacher and they're like agitated and they can't sit straight, and they're labeled ADHD or ADHD. And oftentimes my whole thing was like, wow, it's basically a food allergy condition that they're being prescribed some kind of psychological medication of sorts. But this goes even further, is that, I think of things like Candida, and how it shifts people's personality. Like, it's like Candida consciousness with people.
Right.
And that I'm assuming we're pretty much talking about the same thing with this mold toxicity.
Yeah, so you can have the mold toxins build up, and you can also have a systemic infection of mold growth, which you would need antifungals for. But one thing that people don't realize is that things like ozone, it'll kill mold, but dead mycotoxins for people that have these genetic glitches, they're as immunostimulating as living mycotoxins. So that's where the product is called TM100. It's a biodegradable enzyme that helps kind of digest the mycotoxins so that you don't get that stimulation to the person, who's experiencing these symptoms.
Wow, thank you so much for bringing that point up, and that kind of brings full circle this whole let's kill things kind of modality, because like killing a parasite or something. Now you have a dead organism in your body, and your immune system is probably responding to it like a foreign organism, and it can't move it out. So it's like decaying within you.
Right. Exactly. And that's why for these people, like myself, who can't detoxify mold well, we have to be extra careful, and we have to take supplements at times to help, bring it out of the body.
Right. How would somebody test for this genetic defect?
LabCorp. The test is it's an HLA, which stands for human leukocyte antigen testing. If you go to the website, I think it's survivingmold.com.
Wow.
It's Richie Shoemaker's website. He's the doctor who kind of brought mold to the forefront. I believe he actually has the LabCorp codes on there. And when you get the results, there are sites you can go to online that will help you decipher what your profile is, because it's not directly readable from the results. But there's basically 5 different levels of the gene that you can have, in terms of not being able to detoxify mold.
Interesting. I want to ask you, are you familiar with certain electronic medicine like zappers?
Yeah, I know a little bit about zappers. I know a fair amount about Rife machines and things like that, and electromedicine. I'm not an expert in them, but yeah, I've used them periodically throughout the years.
Yeah, the reason I bring that up is because, a lot of people have said that people with long-standing Lyme condition, they've done all the diet stuff, they've been through the whole thing, and then they say once they started doing zappers, like the old one was the Hulda Clark, and then the Don Croft zappers, that was the thing that actually knocked out the stealth pathogens, if you will. And it's basically just sending a square wave electrical current through the circulatory system, and it basically disrupts the resonant frequency that these pathogens operate under.
Right, yeah, and that gets into how EMFs can negatively affect pathogens as well, because they kind of send signals to mold to produce more mycotoxins and more potent mycotoxins. And so that's kind of focusing on, 2 different ends of the spectrum, but the point being that, these electrical EMF type systems can affect pathogens.
Wow, so wild. Whew, okay.
Absolutely.
Wow, I feel like we just went through so much in such a short amount of time. I would love to bring some concluding content here. What am I even trying to ask? What are some of the maybe actionable steps and just insights that you could leave all of us based on, our conversation here?
Yeah, well, in terms of mold, we just talked about mold, having your home tested for mold. There are different tests out there. One's called an ERMI, capital ERMI, or you can have someone come in and do air sampling or vacuum sampling of mold. You can also have what's called a urine real-time labs test that tests for mold or mycotoxins that are coming out through your urine. So those are some things you can do if you're having brain fog, a lot of postnasal drip, you just don't feel like yourself maybe. And I think it's a good idea for everyone to have their home tested, because especially if they have one of these genotypes, what's safe for one person, is not going to be safe for another person. So it's always context dependent. Other things I would say, all the nutrition stuff that you focus on, circadian cycle, getting enough sun, earthing, getting rid of Wi-Fi. I hardwire in to my computer. I keep the cell phone away from me most of the time or in airplane mode. And I have, certain devices that you can get to plug into the walls to decrease the EMF exposure. And another important point that I forgot is you should also have your car tested for mold and check your cabin air filter regularly, because if you're sensitive to mold and mycotoxins and you live in a humid area, or you've had a water leak, or water spilled in your car, there could be mold growing there. So don't forget to check that out. In terms of basic immune support, magnesium along with vitamin D and vitamin A are extremely important. Balancing your cortisol and DHEA is important, because DHEA is extremely effective in terms of boosting and modulating the immune system. Keeping your zinc levels optimized, and if you want to check your zinc levels, you can ask your practitioner for what's called a red blood cell zinc test, and that tells us how much zinc is inside the cells. We want that to be optimal because zinc is involved in over 200 biochemical reactions. And then, meditation and the spiritual stuff and the inner child work and the trauma release that, we talked about briefly, that you know much more about than I do. I'm just getting into. You can do all the IVs, all the supplements, all the organic food in the world. But if you have these tapes playing in your head over and over that you're no good, that you can't succeed, that you can't overcome this, then that's going to simply negate everything you're doing.
That is such a profound point of interest, because I was raised originally in the success philosophy, personal development world.
Right.
And so I had that backbone, fortunately, and that's the work that I merge in with the health stuff, is that psychological mindset, aspect of that, because I found that, and especially being in the raw food world as deep as I've been into it, it's just a fascinating phenomenon of people that I've seen what actually works. I've seen people that make this thing work and people that don't, and the distinction, besides like somebody's metabolic signature, doing a diet that's imbalanced, is ultimately their attitude and the personality factors, like you just said, like running that tape of okay, I'm cleansing, I'm doing juices, I'm doing all this other stuff, but why do I still hold weight on my body? It's like, well, maybe you're holding a whole lot of pressure on yourself. You're putting pressure on yourself, and you have these childhood traumas or whatever that you've never actually worked through. So you're using food cosmetically without using it as fuel that gives you more clarity to actually, reprogram.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was well said. Very well said.
Wow. I definitely, I'm going to say this to you and for everyone, I'm going to have to get you back on the show, because we've really just kind of scratched the surface here. And this just opens up so much more. It's an infinite conversation, and you're just a vault of very specific knowledge that I just want to pry out some more. So we're definitely going to have to set that up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to be back on.
Cool. So where can people tune directly into your work?
They can email me. My email is lowercase drtim, and then the number 072981 at gmail.com. So Dr. Tim 072981 at gmail.com. And my website is healyourbody.org. You can also find my professional Facebook page, Dr. Tim Jackson, and message me or contact me through there. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. All right, everyone out there. Wow. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. And I really hope that you took out some insights, principles, and strategies that you can immediately implement into your lifestyle design. You know, remember that the conversations are amazing, but unless you take a nugget out that you can take action on and explore this with your own experience, it's not going to accrue the results that you really are trying to get. So I really encourage you guys to listen to these podcasts, especially an informational rich one like this. Listen to it over and over. It's 1 hour out of your day. Go for a walk. Make it part of your active meditation and let the information sink in, because over time, little aha moments will arise for you. Even for me listening to this, I'm only able to comprehend the conversation because of all the years of being in this field and allowing my mind to open up to it. So as you open up to it, new insights will come to you as you're ready for it. So with that said, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. And until next time, aloha.
Thank you, Ronnie.